Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I think it was really interesting when we started this company about 3.5 years ago. There's a lot of individuals like Evan who are coming up on stage and saying, hey, we're just around the corner. We're going to be able to take the satellite selfie. And so this is an amazing vision that so many people around the world, as I was in my last job, was actually talking to. And they're really fascinated by it. They'd seen, maybe you'd seen movies where it's like, hey, you get on the computer and you zoom in on a part of the world. And so when they actually went to start working with these, a number of these companies that are starting to do it 3-4 years ago, they're all building these constellations of satellites. Most of them are optical. And I'll get to why that's important in a minute. But they were really frustrated. There's a lot of various pieces of frustrations. There was the, how do you actually get an image from the satellite down? How do you understand what it means? And then there's just even the simple one of, how do you actually, if it's an optical satellite, if you see clouds out there, so all of us from the New York region, we realize that from, let's say October to March, we really don't see the sun. And so that was one of the things where it started to lead to this. We said, okay, how do we actually solve these problems, get to this experience? That was something that, individuals really wanted in this industry. And so if we look at what was really successful was actually Google Maps. It was probably, I think, the first successful consumer application for using satellite data and bringing it out to consumers. And one of the keys with that was because it was using GPS. So GPS was really reliable, and you're able to get that reliable signal, even though that the image underlying GPS may be a couple weeks old, it doesn't matter. So what we did is we said, hey, there's a particular type of technology. It's been around for a while, but it really wasn't exposed. And this was what's called synthetic aperture radar. Some people have heard it as SAR. So for example, this is actually Hurricane Harvey last year. And you can see in the image on the left, there's your left there. There's the hurricane coming in. And so there's all these clouds. And basically, an optical image, you're not going to be able to see the ground at all. Versus the image on the right here, this is a radar image. And so you can see we're able to just really be able to see through the clouds. You can see at night, and you can measure what's going on. And so this is before the hurricane came in. And so notice the colorization of this map here. So if we actually move it to the next one, this is actually during when the eye of the hurricane was coming over land. We were able to still take that image. And so if you look at here, see all these dark spots here? That's all the flooding that was actually going on. And so one thing that we did is, and actually some of the team members are here in the room today, is they were really compelled by this. And we said, hey, we've got access to all of these radar satellites. We've got this technology to be able to analyze this data quickly. And so we actually started this program where we were every 12 hours updating, what the flooding was going on in this area, even though there is clouds. And so this is going, before anybody could fly a helicopter in, before anybody could even drive a truck into some of these areas because the hurricane winds or flooding was too much, we had this piece. So if I flip back and forth a little bit, so these are actually aligned, so you can see where all those dark areas, that's all the different flooding. So it was really extensive. And so we took this to the next step and we started saying, okay, here's other parts we could start zooming into. This is actually an oil refinery in Texas. We could start zooming in all the way down into the deeps here, and we could say, what is going on within this refinery? How much of it is online? How much is not online? And this is really interesting information, because if you think about what's the second thing that people report on in the media is like, what's oil prices going to do, or gas prices going to do because of all the flooding and damage that's going on in Houston. And this has been a really great piece for us using the radars, because what we get this really consistent, reliable image to be able to say what's going on here. We use optical imagery to give us context of who's doing what within this area. But this is something where we do actively now, where we, you heard about Nick talking earlier, where the New York Times is trying to figure out, verify. They get a cell phone video, they get somebody on the ground, say what's going on here. And so we actually do this with satellites. People literally send us cell phone videos, and we'll go use satellites and do some time history, and we'll say, here before it was dry, this is where the flooding is, this is the extent, this is how much damage there is. And even afterwards, we can start saying, is somebody actually rebuilding this factory, not rebuilding this factory? And so when we look into the markets, a lot of the customers we work with, their basic question is, what is going on around the world? What's true, what's not true? And so the cool thing we do here is, since we use radar, we measure speed, distance, direction, presence. So it gives us lots of cool, interesting measurements. But really key is we combine that with context. So for example, our biggest project is we measure the majority of the world's crude oil every week. And so, for example, just some measurements in Caribbean, since we know what Venezuela tanks they own down there, we actually are seeing this changes of the political atmosphere. We take that other context in China, we understand who owns these tanks, but then we also look at other pieces of data like what ship flows are coming in, and we can actually then start predicting what is the demand in China going to be. And so, for example, this morning, demand in China is still very high for oil. The refineries are moving at very high rates, and so this becomes a prediction of activity. So this is keeping going on to the future. So right now we're kind of on a weekly basis, but basically, Evan said he wanted a selfie of himself. And in the future, that's where it's coming. There's 10x the number of satellites being built, and there's all the infrastructure underneath of how do you get that data from the ground to these satellites that's coming online. That's going to really allow us in the next couple of years start thinking about hourly revisits, multiple time revisits a day. Then you add into that what's happening in the high altitude balloons, unmanned aerial vehicles. And you can start seeing where, for these macro level questions about the world, we can really start using these remotely sensed objects to start understanding pieces of the world. You combine that with all the way down to micro information from your cell phone, and you really start predicting and understanding what are the global trends that are happening, versus just understanding, who's that person's face and what's in their background. If you want to learn anything more about this, just find us around. We have a few team members, and thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That was great.